Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for their continued support, tuning in and listening to Into the Afroverse as we're entering into the second half of our second year on air. And folks are always asking what can they do to support the show to keep us on air. Please go to the website afrofuturismnet.com. And you can see there how you can support us and sponsor us. And also don't forget to check out past episodes on the YouTube channel for the Afrofuturism Network. Today, we are fortunate enough to have a returning guest. For those of you that have been listening, I'm sure you've heard of Miss N.D. Jones. And Ms. Jones is an award-winning African-American female author who's achieved USA Today's best-selling status for her captivating Black fantasy and paranormal romance novels. She resides in the heart of Maryland with her loving family, and she is a trailblazer in the literary world of Blacks in fantasy. In her novels, the paranormal is not merely a background feature. It takes center stage and is crucial to the plot, enriching the reader's experience with every turn of the page. N.D. Jones invites you to join her on an extraordinary journey where Black love intertwines seamlessly with the paranormal, creating a world where love, mystery, and enchantment reign supreme. And with that, I'd like to welcome back Miss N.D. Jones. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to congratulate you, actually. I didn't realize it had been so long as far as this wonderful endeavor that you've undertaken. And I know it's a heavy but wonderful lift. And I just want to say congratulations and to good luck and just keep moving forward with this. It's a
Oh,
great opportunity for all involved.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. So yeah, like I said, we're welcoming you back and thank you so much for returning. And like I said, the door is always open. We work together on so many other projects and I just love what you're doing and I love the energy. I love the perspective. I love what you're bringing to Afrofuturism and the paranormal. So that's why, I keep coming back to you because you're doing such a great
Thank you.
job. Um, can you give us an update? Speak to some of the newer projects, some of the things that have come out since last we've spoken, and what we can look forward to in 2024.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, right before we started, I had gotten up early and I just said, I'm trying to get my numbers up with my productivity with my writing because I'm always kind of allowing myself to be distracted with other projects. And some of those other projects I absolutely love, but they also are easier. And I want to put that out there because sometimes our distractors, while they are fulfilling in one type of way, they also kind of pulls us away from things that are a bit more challenging and harder to get our mind and time around. And for an author, we can find many distractors. And I am no exception to that. But what I am currently working on is the first book in my Freedom series, and that will be a trilogy of books. And the first book is entitled Harriet's Escape. And I am about 19 chapters in. That's what I was actually working on before we got together today. So again, it's her called Harriet's Escape, and the overall idea of the trilogy is to reimagine different historical figures in a fantastical or paranormal way. So the bio that you read is really apt. So the first reimagining for Harriet's Escape takes on the form of the life and legacy of Harriet Tubman. And in that book, I basically really not just tell her story, but it's really more of a family story.
Hmm.
And so she is a shapeshifter and, talking about our African history. She shapeshifts into a Sankofa bird, and the I have Dragon Shifter as well, and they step in and play the role as what we know to be like, the slave owners, these historical whites who kept our people in bondage. And so I kind of really go through that, but that's the first book. So I'm working on that. Like I said, the second book I pick up with the reimagining of the Denmark Vesey character. And in that character, he is in that book, he will be a Jen. I've never written Jens before. And I have all these covers. They're absolutely beautiful. So I'm like, I need to write these books.
Right.
And then the third book, which is actually the cover I purchased initially before I envisioned this being more than just a singular book, is actually based loosely based reimagining of like of Asada Shakur. So again, I don't know all that looks what that's going to look like, but she is what did I she has interesting powers in that particular book. So that's where my trilogy is. But I'm beginning with the Harriet Tubman, and it's going to be loosely tied into some of the other books. I'm trying to figure out how close the books will be as far as the trilogy, or if they're just going to be totally standalone. But I've left some clues so far that leads into the book with the Vesey character and him being a Jen. So we're going to see exactly what that looks like. I don't know. I don't have all the answers yet, but that's where I am as far as my writing. And so Harry's Escape will be the first book I'll release in 2024. That will likely be around the early part of spring. Because like I said, I'm still writing it 19 chapters in, almost 60,000 words in, but I still have a good chunk of the book to write.
Wow. So you dropped Harriet Tubman, Demar Vesey, and Asada Secure on us. That is amazing. Let me talk real quick. I want to talk about each one of them.
Okay.
Okay. But Harriet Tubman, what do you think it is about her story that endures? Um, I've seen, now, most recently there was a film on it. There's a comic book series. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Harriet Tubman Demon Slayer, that's blowing
Oh
up.
man.
Um, and this was a woman that, of course, many of us learned about in elementary school. But here it is, 2024, and we're still talking about this woman. What do you think it is about her in particular that her story has endured all of this time and still fascinates us and still interests us?
That's a great question. And I think it is because if we can look at any historical figure and with us like what we do as far as Afrofuturism and fantasy, well, we're always looking for like these larger than life figures, these heroes, these people who defied the odds. And she is one of them. We have a multitude, by the way, but she is one of them. But I think part of it is because she was honestly, her biography was lifted up and really embellished. I could talk a little bit about that, but it was really lifted up by some of these white historians because they wanted someone to kind of push forward. And she was one of those rare individuals who really they gave a platform to tell her story. And she lived for a super long time. She was almost 100 like before she died. So she was able to lived to the point where people was really starting to collect data from people who survived slavery, and she was one of those biggest forces. And she kind of had her feet in a lot of different places as far as not just the fight to end slavery to free her family and friends, but also as far as women's rights and really taking an active role in the Civil War. So she did a lot just as a person, but also as a woman standing in places in which a lot of women didn't necessarily stand, especially Black women. And so, but I really think it's because you had these white female historians who decide to tell her story. And even though they didn't completely tell it in like a totally honest way, but they told it. And so you had something very concrete that people could look at. And because her legacy is wide and she did so much, there's probably more evidence than there is for other people. So you can have future historians who could go back and they can find records of her, her family, and not all of them, but there's something that exists there because of what she did. And that people looked at that and decided to chronicle some of those things.
Excellent. And with all that we already know, because like you said, they've done a great job of documenting her story. With all that we know, all that we think we know about Harriet Tubman, did you discover anything new? Did you discover something that maybe a lot of folks were not aware of, or something that even surprised you?
Oh, absolutely. I can say almost everything. And I will say this, I'm looking here because I
Right.
always forget. But I'm saying I'm looking here, no one can see, but I'm at my desk, at my work desk here, and I have a ton of stuff. I have like a 2-page outline of all of the main historical beats in her life, as far as how far I'm going to go that I want to cover. But I have this massive tome here. It's like almost 400 pages, and it's entitled Bound for the Promised Land, Harriet Tubman, Portrait of an American Hero, and it's written by Kate Clifford Larson, who's another white female historian. So when I undertook the this urge I had to tell this story, I started researching because I did not trust that anything I learned in college or in high school was ample information to write this story, even a reimagined one. And so I pulled out Miss Larson's book and started reading. And she was the one, and I love her work in that because she took all those other earlier biographies and she really deconstructed those pieces as she wrote her own story. So she was very clear about points in which the actual evidence, the history, could substantiate certain claims that you may have heard about in from previous books or heard about or learned about in school. And she would say clearly, yeah, there's no evidence to this, or this author or historian deliberately embellished. So one of the embellishments were the numbers as far as the people that she actually either directly or indirectly helped to free. So indirectly meant that she gave all her information, everything that she learned about that passage and how to do it to other people. And that allowed them to take that information to use it in a way to bring other people from the North to the South. But partly because of the embellishment, it was like hundreds and hundreds. Well, that's simply untrue. But the numbers were still respectable for what she did. And it's a point where you don't have to embellish. The simple fact that she was able to do what she did, was never caught, never truly chased, which was interesting. Is that because I know you people tried to dramatize what happened, that she's on the run and someone's
Right.
fast and furious after her. Really, that's false.
Right.
None of that's true. And it took her a while to actually even return to Maryland, even though she had things in the work. So it was much of what I learned in that I tried to put in the book, which was a really aha moment for me. It's so much. And so when I thought about framing the book and I'm reading all this information, what I really learned was it's not really just a story about what it took for her to run away and to come back and to free the people she wanted to free, who she could free. But it was really a story about family. And that's how I framed my novel because her parents, they had 9 children. And she fell, I think she was like the fourth or fifth of those 9 children. And in that, I believe they had 5 girls and 4 sons, her parents. And of her girls, in the end, she was the only girl that survived.
Wow.
3 of them were sold off. One, which I think was her last effort there, was her sister Rachel, and she tried to save her. She tried to rescue her, but when she went there, she found that she had passed away, and she had 2 kids, and she couldn't find her niece. I think it was a niece and a nephew. But as I'm reading this biography, I'm really taken in by everything that happened with this family, their resilience, their resistance, but also just the volume of the destruction of their family, the pain. and everything her parents went through and that she went through. And so what happened was, and me explaining this really long explanation, but it's the thoughts that cross my mind as I'm reading and I'm thinking about this, was that it's really a story of her going back to rescue her family because she didn't want to live a life of freedom without them. So we talk about all the different people that she saved, but what we don't talk about was every single time she returned home, it was to save a member of her family. And when she couldn't do that, she took who she could. So it wasn't as if she didn't care about those other people, but they were very seldom the motivation for her to return. And she returned time and time again. And her last people that she really brought forth, they were her parents. And they themselves, which I didn't know, that when they still were in Maryland, they started doing stuff with the Railroad and helping people to get to slavery.
Wow.
And then she had to get them out so they wouldn't be killed. And I never knew that, you know. So it's just a lot. It's just a lot. And that's the power of when an author takes their time to read and do the research. And so I learned a lot. What I just talked about was just a really small portion of what I learned going through this book. And I tried to put in as many of those pieces as possible because it's easy just to say, well, of course, slavery is bad, so therefore she ran away. Well, we know that intellectually.
Right.
But if you build that foundation of her family, what they endured, what she endured, that's really the story for me. And so I'm not glorifying the running away or the coming back, but all the emotion that's entwined in those very deliberate acts of resistance.
I see. Wow, that's incredible. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is we're taking Black folks into the future. And today we are rejoined by ND Jones. She's telling us about some of the upcoming work and some of the historical figures that she's incorporating into her work. So you mentioned Denmark VC as well. Um, Many people, I'm sure folks that are listening are familiar with him, but there are a lot of folks that are not in terms of his role in resistance here in the U.S. Give us a little bit of background on him and why did you select him?
And I haven't read it yet because I'm
Right.
kind of focused on one, but I have a book on him as well. And I, you know, you same thing you learn in school, you know, I guess if you're not in Florida and some of these other places now. So
Right.
kind of frightened for what our young Black kids are learning. But I used to actually teach when I was a high school teacher. I taught American government, but for 10 years I also taught African American history. And so, you know, you get to that point in the curriculum in which you talk about slave rebellion, slave resistance, and there's a multitude of ways in which African American people rebelled, and so those type of gatherings in which you're going to have, you know, you're really going to say, oh, we're just going to, you know, kill these people. They deserve it, whatever, how we look at it, but whatever that revenge theory looks like, you kind of talk about people like Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey. Talk about the ones who was able to really kick it off, um, and then the ones who not so much. But the planning was there, the intention was there, the impetus to write what they felt was a really was a wrong, and it really was a wrong. And so I picked someone who is perhaps it's not as, let's say, popular
Right.
as someone like a Nat Turner. You know that you had a Nat Turner movie several years ago, which I think overall was well done. But I think Demavasi isn't in the normal popular discourse among people who would actually even know, because a lot of people have no idea who he is. But sometimes he definitely will be found in the history books. So I could have chosen Nat Turner because he's definitely more popular. Again, someone if you say that name, a lot of people will say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I've heard about him. Didn't he lead this bloody rebellion? Didn't he even kill children and everything? And then he was killed as a result." You don't really get that with Denmark Vesey. So that's really the reason why I chose him, just because his story isn't as well known, isn't as properly told. And so just to explore that a bit more, the evidence, the data, the historical points aren't always as there as they are for Nat Turner, but there's information about his family. There's definitely things that he's done that I can pull from to support the book. So that's the reason why I chose him and not someone who is perhaps more popular in our normal type of discourse of Black males' physical resistance to enslavement.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned, like I said, Harriet Tubman. We're talking about Vesey right now. And when it comes to these Black historical figures, many of us hold them obviously in high regard. We're very protective of them and their legacy. How do you walk the line where you are paying homage, you're respecting their life and their legacy, but also incorporating a paranormal element? Is there, or have you had any feedback from folks that maybe you've shared this with, where there's concern that I won't say parody, but maybe it kind of takes away from their actual life and legacy when you start to incorporate paranormal elements and so forth? Or, do you find that to be a challenge, or are you just able to make it work?
I haven't spoken to anyone, probably because the book isn't out yet for me to receive that kind of feedback. And I haven't, because it's still in the draft phase, I haven't given it to anyone else to look at. But I take your point. And I will say, as I'm going through the Harriet Tubman book, I'm mindful of, like I said, those historical beats. So let me kind of explain. So in the very beginning, I had different names for all of her for Harriet Tubman specifically, but for also for the members of her family. Came with these names. So the first few chapters I wrote and it had these other names. And then I paused and I thought back. I said, wait, change the last name, leave the first names. And I left the first names because I wanted to honor them. I want people as they read them and to say their name because these are people who are long since gone, but they lived and they have value, even if their fates are unknown. So I deliberately put their names in there because I want to speak that. But as I'm going through the book and I'm trying to be true to many different parts of what happened in her life, especially in the beginning, I wanted to show the hardships of slavery, but I'm always thinking about how to not only show that, but to balance that out with the happiness, love, the glory of being in a family because I don't want to glorify violence, but I want to still be honest because, yes, it was awful. And when you read the stories about what happened to her as a child, I'm talking about little children who should be in elementary school, but you're working in someone's home and they beat you literally every day. Um, so I want to show that because there's a truth to that, but I try not to glorify that because that's not the story itself, but it is at the same time. And so that's where I am with going back and forth. So I have to show like a harsh reality, and then at the same time, how do I show something else? And so I don't know if I struck that balance or not, but that's what I'm always mindful to keep in mind as I'm writing these, going from section to section, chapter to chapter. Now, as far as the paranormal um, elements in it, to me, I think that is the easier part. You write that someone changes into a bird, but because it's a lot of symbolism there. I made them flightless birds. And so you could think about all the different ways in which that is a symbolism for enslavement. That in a way that these people who should be able to fly away to earn their freedom quite easily, but it's like no, you took away the most significant piece of what it means for them to actually be a bird.
Right.
And what does that mean when you have something that is actually totally useless, which are your wings? How does that make you feel? And then you juxtapose that with these creatures who I made the masters these dragons. So it's like, oh, even if I could fly, could I outfly a dragon?
You're right.
So there's no physical comparison. I've written two stories with dragons before. They're these huge, mighty beasts. And so you have to think of creative and it's hard to think of really good ways to really hurt or harm a dragon. But if you liken dragons to not only the equivalent of this master, but the equivalent of this huge, massive system. So a dragon represents not just the individual, but the entire system. So it's just this huge oppressive system that is like, wow, they're huge. Can I fight against that? Can I run away from that? So when I think if people read it and they leave their minds open and not just looking at these as just these paranormal or mythological creatures and take it for the symbolism that it is, I think they'll understand the weaving of the story that I am attempting to tell. And in that way, I think it is honoring the history and legacy of these people by giving them a voice, but also, if you like fantasy, wrapping it up in the enjoyment of seeing a freaking big dragon.
Right. And what I like about that approach is you mentioned young people. I think this would be a great way to introduce all audiences that are learning and looking to learn more about the legacies and life of Harriet Tubman and Vesey as well, but also young people in particular, because sometimes when we're trying to teach the history, especially to younger audiences, uh, they see these big history books and they get intimidated and so forth. But when you can cloak it in these paranormal stories and so forth. I think that's a great way to get folks into it and say, I want to know more about these people, in terms of the reality of their lives. So I like that approach. Uh, so these are not your first books, obviously. And like I said, we've had you on, best-selling author. How can folks find your past works and your upcoming work? How can they find you on social media and so forth, or contact you directly?
I'm gonna answer that question. Can I go back just to make one
Please.
comment to what you just said about young people? And I will say another piece that I've been really deliberate about because I typically write for adults.
Hmm.
And so what that means is that a lot of the sex that you'll see in there, the language is there because that's what I want to read, and the people like me want to read that too. But I will say that as I'm progressing through this book, I was really mindful of that because that's not what this book is. And I wanted to make it accessible to people who are, really from definitely high school age. And I didn't want, if a parent wanted to buy it or if a school wanted to buy it, that language or sex, anything like that would be a barrier because I really wanted to be accessible. So I appreciate your comment because it really hits to some of the decisions that I've chosen to make as far as the presenting of the material. Now, having said that, most people can find me online. My website is Indy Jones, paranormalpleasure.com. On most places, I am Indy Jones. I am Indy Jones author, excuse me, on I guess X, formerly Twitter, on Instagram. On TikTok, it's Indy Jones author, but my main one is Black fantasy novel. So that's a switch, really trying to promote that's really what I write, what I do. And also on YouTube is also Indy Jones author. So pretty consistent with the Indy Jones author across the board as well.
Excellent. Now, believe it or not, we are coming up to the end of the segment. It always goes so quickly when we're talking. Uh, but I do want you to come back because we didn't get an opportunity to talk about Asada Shakur. And I mean, I'm just fascinated by what your plans are in terms of what you want to do with her, especially given that this is living history. This is right now in terms of she's still with us and so forth, and still a controversial figure. So you definitely got to talk about her. I really want to hear about your take on her life. Uh, any final words you'd like to leave us with?
I just want to say happy 2024 to everyone. And I want to just wish everyone just like a happy new year to keep pushing forth your purpose. Today is the sixth day of Kwanzaa, and my family talked about purpose yesterday. And we want to have everyone to live in their purpose, to not let barriers, whether they are internal or external, to prevent you from moving forward, to positively contributing to your family, to your community, and allowing yourself also to be open to being uplifted by other people's positive energy. And that includes you, William. So again, I thank you for having me here. I'm always available to speak with you, but to support you in any other endeavors as well. So I want to wish you and your family a happy new year.
Thank you so much. So that'll about do it for another episode of Into the Afroverse. We're taking Black folks into the future. One more time, thank you to our guest, N.D. Jones. And folks that are looking her up, please, that is the letter N, the letter D, not Indy like independent, but the letter N, the letter D, Jones. Thank you again. And like I said, we got to talk about Sada Shakur and some other work that you have coming up and some other projects. So remember, folks, you can find me on afrofuturismnet.com if you're looking to support us financially, and also check out the YouTube page for past episodes, Afrofuturism Network, and of course, you can find us on all the social media. And thank you, can't say it enough, for tuning in and continuing to tune in, and tell your friends to tune in as well. So that'll do it. Take care, and a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Thank you.